So, let's talk about the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. This will be discussed in two parts. I will start with a non spoiler section to give a generic thoughts and feelings on the book, and then I will move on to more spoilery bits because there's a lot that I need to discuss that were technically spoilers. So, to begin with, this is the origin story of President Coriolanus Snow, who was the main antagonist of the Hunger Games trilogy, and his origin shows that at the 10th annual Hunger Games, so that was 64 years before the events of the first trilogy, he was put in charge of mentoring a young District 12 tribute, the female tribute, and he wants her to win. And it was a really interesting story because it was the 10th annual Hunger Games. You got to see the capital still so raw at that point because they were still rebuilding themselves after the war that kicked off the Hunger Games starting because of the last revolution in the war. You got to see the capital is still in absolute ruin, and it was so interesting and good to see the capital like that because it was so interesting to compare to how the capital was during the Hunger Games trilogy, where there was the shining stars, the best place, everyone was lovely and amazing and like absolute top tier life. And then during the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, they were not actually doing that well themselves because they were still rebuilding from the war. So the story follows Coriolanus Snow as him and his family, who were once quite prominent members of the capital, basically starting to go downhill because Snow's parents both died during the war, and since then, Snow, his cousin, and grandmom are the only, I think, relatives left, and they are really struggling. They're struggling to pay their rent. They're living in a very expensive, posh-looking penthouse, but they can't afford to pay the rent. And Snow is just finishing up studies, and he is offered the opportunity to become a mentor for one of the tributes of the Hunger Games. And it's so interesting to see the Hunger Games themselves because they were so new and so cheap and amateurish in comparison to how they were in the series because it was only the 10th one. They'd literally just started out, they had no concept of what was happening, and it was quite interesting to see how little everyone cared about them because when you make the comparison to the Hunger Games, no one cares about these because it's not really televised. No one has to watch. People can't give the tributes sponsored gifts. They can't do that. They've never done that before. And it was so interesting to see what it was like back then because it then made you think, right, well, how the hell did all of this come about? How did it develop? And I loved that part about it. I thought it was great. And you just got to see Snow, his relationship with all of his friends who he studied with, who became mentors for the other tributes, and how their relationship was and how it changed throughout the games and all of that story. You got to see his relationship with his tribute, how he felt about her, how he tried to protect her, things like that. And I thought it was excellent. I did struggle to read the book, but I think I did a 24-hour readathon of the Hunger Games trilogy, um, and then went straight into this. And I think after a 24-hour readathon, I did just put myself in a bit of a slump, so I wasn't really in the mood to read this. But I did eventually finish it. I think I got the last 300 pages in the last 2 days. So I think I come out of my slump. I was ready to read it then, and I got really into it. I feel as though pre going into the games and the games were just maybe a little bit slow pacing wise. I thought it was excellent. They put a lot of effort into, like, Suzanne Collins put a lot of effort into the description of what these characters were, what this world was like back then, and that was great because when you're a fan of such a series, when you're a fan of the Hunger Games, you want to know what it was like before, and you can see the development and how that's done, and that was great. My only issue was that, considering this was an origin story, not enough time for me was dedicated to the origin aspect. I feel as though there was a lot of origin story towards the end, but when it's a 517 page book, don't get to an origin story on page bloody 350 to 400. Like, you, that is one surefire way to lose fans. And if it wasn't billed as an origin story, then I would have been absolutely fine. This would have been top 5 star, top class, amazing. But because it was an origin story, and I feel as though the origin wasn't given as much as it should have been, then I dropped it down to a 4 star, and that's my final rating of that. I do feel as though if Suzanne Collins had taken out 50 pages from the building of the background of the Capitol and Snow's life, and maybe 50 pages of the Hunger Games themselves, then this would have been absolute top class book, because it had everything in it, didn't really lose anything, it had all of the things it needed, plus the book would be like 400 pages and got a great story out of it, and that would have been really, really good. And that is what I needed from life. And I think this book delivered in everything I needed. It was just a bit too long for what we got given. And that was my main complaint. What I did love about this book, and I'm going to try and say this in a very non-spoilery way, it didn't compromise what we knew about President Snow. Because everyone says that they felt that the main issue they were going to have with this book is that she was going to justify Snow's actions. She was going to make us fall in love with Snow and say, yeah, I get why he did that. I understand. And she didn't. I did not agree with a lot of Snow's actions. I did agree with some, but I think that spoke not to her trying to justify that. It spoke to the reality of the situation. And if you've read the book, I will discuss this a bit more in the spoiler section. But I was so pleased when I realised that she wasn't compromising the character of President Snow that we knew and hated in the Hunger Games. That aspect of him was not compromised in this. It didn't change what I felt about Snow, and I loved it. I thought it was great. So now I'm going to move on to the more spoilery section of the book. So if you have not read the book yet, I would not continue. So if you are leaving, thanks a lot for watching. If you are staying for the more spoiler-based critiques, then let's get straight to it. So, one of the absolute things I loved about this book, I mentioned it just then, was the character of Snow. I thought it was great because his character was not compromised. I know I've just said it, but it was great and I loved it. I felt as though from the Hunger Games trilogy, maybe everyone saw him differently, but I saw President Snow as a man who would do anything to survive. He was all about self-preservation. He was all about having control. He was all about winning because that is what he wanted to do. He did not want to lose control and seem weak to anybody. And this book really stuck with that and rolled with it. And it was the main critique that was going to make him say, oh, he was driven to do it by love. And he wasn't driven to do it by love. Snow very clearly showed some sort of sociopathic tendencies. And I love that the story didn't just say, bring the villain out of nowhere. Because I think with a lot of villains, a lot of people can be driven to do things. A lot of people can be hurt so much they do things. I get that. But I think the best villains are the ones that they're always a little bit twisted. Just naturally. They naturally have to have that mentality that allows them to do that. And Snow had that mentality. He wanted to win. He wanted to do what he could to win this prize so that he could protect him and his family. Probably not even his family, to be honest. He wanted to protect himself. He wanted the Snow legacy to continue. He has always showed those little tiny snippets of what he was truly like. He is very controlling. He was so jealous and controlling of Lucy Gray. Even before the Hunger Games, when she was going into pretty much certain death, Whenever someone spoke to her, he wasn't happy. When the news crews were on her, he was like, yes, great, perfect, they're on her. I need to get in on that. He wanted everything, and he was so jealous of anyone that had something he didn't. And I thought that was a great lead into the story. I thought then getting on towards the end of the book when Sejanus, who I thought was an amazing character. I loved him. I didn't agree with everything he did. I don't think a lot of people necessarily agreed with what he did, but I thought he was an excellent character. Very, very well developed. But when Sejanus got to a point where he was then becoming a problem for Snow, despite them saying over and over again that they are like brothers, they are as close as brothers, Snow saw that he was beginning to become a problem and took him out. He betrayed him, he got him killed. He might say that he didn't think anyone would actually listen to the Jabberjay. He might have said no one would have really thought he didn't actually want him to die. Absolute bollocks. If he didn't want that to happen, he would not have done it in the first place. He wanted it to happen, but he wanted to take the blame away from himself. And I liked that. I thought it was great character development, and it got someone he was so close to killed. And there was just so much in there that I loved about his character. And I feel as though his character was one that wanted to win. He sacrificed so much to be on top. He got his best friend slash brother killed just because he was becoming a problem to him. And then at the end, he realised he could have everything he wanted. Every single thing he wanted. He spent this entire book trying to say to himself, I don't need anything. I want love. I want Lucy Gray. I want her to survive. And I don't think he ever did. I think he might have tried to convince himself that he loved this girl, but I think all he wanted was her to survive so that he could get the prize, so that he could end up on top. Because he has taken a girl who was sure as dead because she was just a nobody from District 12 and make her the top. And what would that do for him? It would do so much. And I loved it. I love that he tried to convince himself. I love that he tried to convince himself so much that he was in love with this girl. He went along with everything. He said, I can give everything up just for this love. And then he found the only thing that could incriminate him in murders that he did. In people that he killed, the only scrap of evidence that could have ended his life, he found and he could get rid of. And as soon as he could get rid of that, he could return home and he could be the top. He could get everything he has ever wanted. And instantly, Lucy Gray became a problem because she knew the truth. And he tried to kill her for it. And he might have killed her for it. That's the only thing that stresses me out, is that I don't know whether she's alive or dead. But he turned on this girl that he spent the entire book saying he was in love with because he wanted to win. And that just shows his character. And that character was shown throughout. It wasn't so in your face. It was just very subtle, dripping in elements of control, in elements of betraying certain people, and just in small, tiny ways where little droplets of doubt came in. That truly showed his character, and I thought that was absolutely amazing writing. Now, I want to talk about the character of Sejanus, because I feel as though I just need to get him in there. He was a character that... He was kind of the moral character, the one who didn't want to do anything because it was wrong. It was wrong to do this. And I love that. I spent a lot of the book agreeing with him, but I found that I also spent a lot of the book thinking, stop it. Stop doing this now, or you will die. And I think the way his character was written, on top of how the story as a whole was written, Suzanne Collins made me sit with him and think, I know you're right, I know you are, but I can't agree with you for my own safety. And I think, even though we've just gone on to this big discussion of Snow and what his character was like, I think the majority of this book was Snow feeling like this to begin with. I think eventually Snow didn't care if it was right or wrong morally. He just wanted to win no matter what. But I think Sejanus's character wanted to do what was right so much that he became a big problem. And he pretty much nearly got himself killed a few times. He nearly got Snow taken down with him. And I was just sat there all the way through this book like, right, seriously, I know what you're trying to do. I understand it. I feel awful about it. But don't get yourself killed just to do the right thing. And that spoke a lot when I took a step back and sat and thought, why am I so willing to let these other people suffer rather than agree with what Sejanus is saying? And I think that was just how well it was written, because it made you question, if you was in that situation, what would you do? How would you act? And as much as everyone would like to say, no, I would absolutely do what is morally right, would you? Because would you choose your own self-preservation over other people? And I thought that was amazing for the characters. I thought it was great. I absolutely loved the story. I said I felt like a lot of this went on too much previous to the Hunger Games and then in the Hunger Games. Like, I thought when they was doing the big build up to the Hunger Games, I thought, right, I have a feeling that she is going to win. She's going to win the Hunger Games, and that's how it's going to go. And then they went into the Hunger Games, and they spent so long in the games, I thought, oh, right, maybe she's going to make it right to the end and then die. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put so much emphasis on the games. And then she didn't. She won. And I was just like, so why have we spent like 200 pages? I don't know how many pages. I am making that up. I'm going to be honest with you. Like, why have we spent so many pages in these games when really they're not that relevant? It's very boring because the tributes went in, basically hid from each other until they died. So I don't really know why they spent so long there. I didn't really see the point. I was more than happy to lose quite a lot of the Hunger Games and basically just make it, because that wasn't the main bulk of the story. The main bulk of the story really happened after the Hunger Games, how their life changed afterwards. There were elements of the Hunger Games that were important, but you could have got them in without all of the boring stuff, if that makes sense. And then to end, I just thought the ending of the book was excellent. I feel as though maybe it was a little rushed because they basically spent the last two chapters in an epilogue at the end, wrapping it up with him turning on Lucy Gray. Like, it was about 50 pages or something like that of a 517 page book. The last 50 pages was him turning on the girl he loved and really becoming the President Snow we know. And I was a bit like, oh, okay, that was quite quick. Like, I think it wasn't quick in general, but when you think of this being an origin story, it was quick, considering the length of the book. It happened in the last 50 pages. But I really enjoyed those 50 pages. Like, when I was reading this book, I was like, there has got to be a sequel, because I won't be happy with how this wraps up if there isn't a sequel, because Suzanne Collins cannot do it justice in the last 50 odd pages. And you know what she did? I don't mind if there's not a sequel. I have plans for a sequel. I'm actually going to be making a video. I've planned it all out. I'm making a video on what, if this was made into a trilogy, would look like, and what the plot should be in my head. This is what I want it to look like. And I'm excited for people to see that. But I just thought it was great. I felt as though it was wrapped up maybe a little bit quickly. But overall, I loved it. I thought it was amazing. The only reason it didn't get a 5-star is because I felt for a 517 page book, the origin story didn't come in it until the last 150 pages. The first part was just trying to make us fall in love with the Hunger Games. So that's it. Yeah. So that is it from me and my review. Hopefully this has helped. I know I spoke a lot about the characters in this spoiler section, but the characters were a bloody main part. And the character of Coriolanus Snow was so detailed and in-depth. I just cannot explain enough how grateful I am to Suzanne Collins for doing this justice, but how much I loved Snow's character. So yeah, that is it from me. I really hope you enjoyed this review. Hopefully you did. Please feel free to drop comments below. I always love a good comment down below because I try and respond to every single comment I get. But if you can, will you please avoid spoiler related comments, because I do have a lot of subscribers who have not read the book yet. I have a lot of friends who have not read the book yet. The last thing they want is to be spoiled for the book, because I know if I was spoiled for this book, I'd have been absolutely devastated. So please try and avoid spoilers, but please feel free to contact me in the comments with any sort of opinions that you have. If you have any spoilery opinions, please contact me over on Instagram or Twitter. The link is down below in the Linktree link. So please click that and just find my account and send me a message there, because I can talk to you privately about it. And that is it from me. So please make sure you click the subscribe button and click the bell so you're always notified when I post. Look out for a future video on this where I talk about what I think a sequel and the end of a trilogy would look like if this was to be made into one. And yeah, please thumbs up, like it, put a comment in the description, do all the usual spiel. And thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. So I will see you later.